Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Matthew Scianitti, who covers Canada soccer, the CFL, and much, much more for TSN. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Matthew.
My pleasure, Alex.
I've heard that you have this amazing shoe collection, and I just wanted to ask you, like, are you wearing some now? Is it your own shoes? Like, where did this come from? I'm so curious.
No, I don't wear my own shoes in my condo. So a few, well, not a few, back almost 20 years ago, I stumbled upon my first pair of Converse All Stars, Chuck Taylors. I decided I'd give them a shot, try them on. And the one thing kind of about me that whether it's been throughout my career, whether my time at the National Post through to Ryerson, authenticity has been really, really important to me.
Hmm.
And in a lot of ways, I've kind of tried to be my own person.
Hmm.
And in that, I would try different styles, different ways of putting my wardrobe together. And the one thing that has lasted for nearly 2 decades has been my Chuck Taylors. Now, I speaking of the collection, I used to have three wall panels made of particle board with little wood pegs in them of
Yeah.
about 75 pairs of Chucks. Now that sounds great when you're in your mid to late 20s. When, as I am now in my late 30s, it sounds kind of it creeps into another realm, given the fact that these aren't Air Jordans, they're not
Yeah.
Air Max. These aren't shoes that you can kind of put into the realm of a safety deposit box.
Yeah.
When you wear Converse over time, they wear pretty quickly because it's
Yeah.
basically just canvas on vulcanized rubber.
Yeah.
Um, and so I trimmed the collection down to at least in my mind, maybe a more reasonable 25, and
Yeah.
donated the rest of the shoes.
Oh,
But
wow.
the
Okay, cool.
my Converse will always be a part of who I am.
Hmm.
As it's getting warmer outside, I can move from the Chuck boot to maybe a more stylish. Well, I've got a few kind of colorful pairs of Chucks. So it's been part of who I am. And when I went to TSN,
Hmm.
um, when I was learning how to wear a suit, tie a tie. As soon as I got down to the dress shoes, I was like, "This isn't this the wingtips, the Oxford shoe.
Hmm.
It wasn't for me." And the story I've told a million times is my first assignment on air for SportsCenter was covering the Leafs and the Devils back over 10 years ago now,
Hmm.
and I wore a black suit with red tie and red pair of Chucks, which did not go over well in the in the press box uh, at Scotiabank Arena. But what I'm happy to see now is, and I do not claim to be somebody who did it first, but
Yeah.
there were a lot of people wearing sneakers with suits back then. But to see how much it's kind of grown as an expression, not just
Hmm.
in sports journalism, but really across so many
Hmm.
occupations, is really cool to see.
And when you go on TV, do you pick, like, is it part of how you kind of do your job? Like, do you feel it's very much a part of you?
That's a great question. You know what it is for me? It all depends on the mood that I'm in, what I'm looking to wear. I used to have most outrageous colors, and
Yeah.
sometimes it would just be I knew on a football field. People talk about hockey, certainly, all
Yeah.
of the tropes in hockey, and
Hmm.
um, all the things that encompass hockey culture. Football is that, and it's into maybe a factor of 10. And I mean, I remember
Hmm.
wearing pink Chucks and getting kind of like I will respectfully say they were quizzical looks from
Hmm.
coaches from the United States. But the fact for me was I was just like, I don't really care what you think. This is who I am. This is
Yeah.
what I enjoy doing. And for me, also having never done television before, 10 years ago, it was a way of me you know, kind of forcing myself to really stay mentally locked in, because I was like, listen, if
Mm.
I'm on television in this atmosphere wearing these shoes, I always have to bring my best. I always have to be aware. And yeah, some nights I wasn't I didn't necessarily, maybe in my own, younger in the way I perceived my job back then, maybe I wasn't measuring up to the style I was trying to put out there. But for me it was like, this is who I am. This is what
Hmm.
I'm this is what I'm about. And this is going to be part of my brand, my persona, who
Right.
I am.
Mhm.
So maybe there's it's kind of in one sense it was an anchor for me
Mhm.
psychologically, and in another sense it was um, kind of a way for me to kind of say, hey, listen, I'm creating a brand here.
Mhm.
Maybe haphazardly in the beginning, but I think it's all worked out in the end.
And with your career, when did you first think you might want to pursue a career in sports journalism and writing?
Initially, when I went, wanted to get into TMU's undergraduate program for journalism. This is back a long, long time ago now. And when I was coming out of high school, I was like, okay, I was deciding what I wanted to do, and it didn't necessarily work out. I moved on to York University. Um, in their professional writing course, I started to write, started to realize I enjoyed writing,
Mhm.
and was doing different kinds of writing, which I think I'm quite happy that I tried to do. I did political writing and
Mm.
some fiction writing, and it kind of helped me maybe grow an understanding of on top of reading. And I always tell people that's the most essential thing that you can do
Mhm.
as a young writer is read as much as you can, and then freelancing. I freelanced for so many different publications,
Mhm.
and then was able to get to the TMU's graduate program in journalism, where I was very, very fortunate to try again, from doing streeters to doing
Mhm.
magazine writing to doing online writing, and every step of the way, I just kept on pushing myself to try something different. I look back on my career at this point, and
Mhm.
I often say I didn't necessarily have an endpoint. I always was just trying to put myself maybe in various stages of discomfort, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could over time build new skills, try new things, put myself in position to be at events and in situations where I could really show my abilities. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it
Mhm.
didn't. But what I've always been happy with is the ability to keep pushing and keep trying and keep being creative. And uh, when going from a National Post internship to the CBC internship to working
Mhm.
at CBC full time to or as a contract full time, and then moving back on to the National Post, and that eventually got me to TSN. When I look back on my career, I've always tried to stay present,
Mhm.
with everything I was doing, and be like, I'm going to execute this objective as best as I can, and then once it's done, it's done, and I literally
Mhm.
wipe it from my
Mhm.
mind. And the older I get, sometimes I kind of sit back and say, I can kind of relish these things and pat myself on the back
Mhm.
because of all of the very fortunate to have done and accomplished certain things. But what's always worked for me in terms of understanding my career and being a writer is, looking at those who've come before me. I was a big fan of Gary Smith with Sports Illustrated, quite
Mhm.
respected Chris Cuthbert, Rod Smith, James
Mhm.
Duthie. Spent time alongside Bruce Arthur at the National Post. Watching all of them and their process really helped inspire me to say, hey, listen, if I get an opportunity, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to appreciate the opportunity to really take this sense of discomfort that I guess I enjoy being in, and pushing myself to see where my abilities can go.
And with you mentioned how interested in pushing yourself as a writer. Now at TSN, you're on air a lot. Was that something where you pushed yourself to kind of into the discomfort of being a sideline reporter, being on TV, or was that something you really wanted to try out?
When my contract ended at the National Post, and um, when I got the opportunity to go to TSN, it was my way of being like, okay, I have to try something new, and it was scary. I mean, I was somebody who didn't necessarily consider myself a particular kind of extrovert. I was somebody who enjoyed, you classify me as being bookish, but I enjoyed um, spending time on my own, and kind of learning the act of writing. But the one thing about writing, especially, is unless you put yourself in upfront, face forward situations, the experience you don't necessarily have maybe the experiences that you would if you weren't doing that. So when I got to TSN, having to be on live TV, having to try, wearing a suit, holding a microphone, all of that is presentation and process. But really, what it boils down to is the willingness to kind of put yourself out there because you're the face of it all of a sudden, and that's something that was brand new to me, and it was scary. And you can find on YouTube, I blew a live hit, and it was, this is almost 10 years ago now, and it was a real moment where things changed for me because I remember kind of pulling myself aside mentally and being like, okay, if you're really going to try this, if you're going to give
Hmm.
this opportunity the respect it deserves, then you're going to have to put yourself in extreme discomfort, which is now live TV is one of my favorite things to do. Now,
Hmm.
I have a process and a way of which I prepare myself for every live event, but it's now become the thing that I sit back and say, when I'm ready to go and I'm ready to do it, yeah, I have the most fun doing this. And that
Hmm.
this is live TV. And if you had told me 5 years ago that would have been the case, I would have probably maybe been a little skeptical, but 5 years before that, I would have told you you're crazy. And now I find
Hmm.
myself, coming off of doing the World Cup and several Grey Cups, and covering every manner of sport that you possibly can at TSN, and feeling like, wow, I've been very fortunate,
Hmm.
but that fortune has come from me being like, okay, put yourself in that discomfort and give it a shot, because you won't know until you try.
Yeah, and you come off so natural on TV. Is that something like with TV, like what is your process to be so prepared on live TV?
Yeah, I'll put it back to a friend and someone I consider a mentor, and who was a coworker of mine, Dean Willers, who is a cameraman at TSN, longtime cameraman, actually, also former NHL draft pick for
Hmm.
the Red Wings many years ago. And he would tell me, um, you know, give yourself a mental game, and the mental game would be, give me 30 seconds on baseball caps. And the whole point of that was, if you look at some of the live hits that we do, we tend to get anywhere between 30 to 45. Now, sometimes we can push it when you're at a major event. You
Hmm.
get live hits for a minute and a half, 2 minutes. I've had a live hit that's pushed into 5 minutes. And, um, but to prepare yourself mentally for that, it's all of the notes that you're trying to make so you don't sound like you're rambling. And so for, 30 seconds, give me something on baseball caps in terms of maybe the history of it, the utility of it, some famous
Hmm.
people who own baseball caps, some of your favorite baseball caps. And I point to that because over 10 years of, and I will, freely admit it, trying it on my own. And sometimes it comes across as me talking to myself, but it would just be literally be like, okay, I would point to something and try to explain it over the course of 30 seconds. And also trial and error in terms of what my process is. Am I someone who writes copious amounts of notes? Do I remember all of those notes? Am I somebody who really focuses on certain aspects of live preparation, whether it be, as I said, note taking, or do I need to be so in tune with my producer or with me? I found my process was be prepared, write your notes down, rehearse it a little bit. My energy level has to be so high. Like, in order for
Hmm.
me to be incredibly engaged, I have to be incredibly like excited, like bring my energy level up, and then
Hmm.
kind of calm myself down. And the last little bit of which I also got from another camera man, Mark Millette, when I started, which is every time you go on live TV, and it's a bit of and I totally enjoy it and accept it. It's become a bit of a something I'm known for at TSN. If in the newsroom when they're putting pieces together just before I go on a live hit, as I always take a breath. I always just close my eyes and take a big deep breath
Hmm.
in, and then I'm ready to go. Which is, I have all this energy, I've got all these things coming, and then all of a sudden take a breath, and everything just releases and relaxes, and then I'm ready to go. So it's been a lot of trial and error. It's been a lot of
Hmm.
time, a lot of practice, a lot of patience, certainly on TSN's part and my coworkers' part. But now I've come to the point in my career where I come off of, again, I point to the World Cup and being like, I'm whatever the situation, whatever the stage, wherever I am, if I'm prepared like that, I'll be good to go.
Hmm. And what was your experience? I know you've covered Olympics, but just to be at a World Cup and covering Canada, what was that like for you?
It's the greatest honor of my professional career, simply because when you think about that event, I was in terms of what my job is. And when you go to an event like that, you do your job. You don't, there's so many moving parts. It's hard to kind of articulate the way it is, because the Olympics, is such a staged, in a lot of ways, it's a staged process where once you get into the flow of it, every sport's like every sport. It's there's your
Hmm.
mix zone, there's your live locate. Like it's something where once you know all the steps to the dance, it's pretty smooth and pretty easy over the course of 2 weeks. For the World Cup, it's you have 3 games, and for us, that first game against Belgium, we had prepared, I don't know, 2 years for it. And we'd gotten,
Hmm.
even though didn't know what Canada was facing Belgium, we had done the work for 2 years to prepare for that. And so that's one kind of level of pressure where you're like, okay, you've rehearsed this for 2 years, don't screw it up. And then once that game is done, you've got 3 days to prepare for another 3 hour pregame
Hmm.
show, which you don't know what you were doing until everything is kind of processed
Yeah.
over the following 24, 48, 72 hours leading up to that Croatia game, and then again against the game against Morocco. Um, so I just trusted my job as a reporter in that position, someone who put some features together, and I trusted my interactions with my coworkers, whether it was Julie de Guzman, James Duthie, Janine Becky, Kevin Kilbane, Stephen Caldwell, Luke Wildman, and then how you're working with your producers, and then you throw in the fact that you're thousands and thousands of miles away from Toronto, and the technological challenges that could present themselves. And when you realize all of that, you realize the enormity of the thing,
Hmm.
and then you distill it down to, this is my job, all I have to worry about is my job. It becomes so fun, and knowing that someone in my role, and really are tired, like we were doing something that, from a men's World Cup perspective, had a Canadian broadcaster had not done really ever.
Hmm.
And so, because we were going into an uncharted territory, it was scary and fun. And I look back on it now, knowing that, wow, there was a lot of pressure on us and a lot of expectation, and yet, um, I think we did an excellent job, and I come away with it feeling very proud and very privileged, because your whole frame of reference opens up, because you get to see, especially when you go to a country like Qatar, and I was also able to go to United Arab Emirates
Hmm.
and Bahrain in that region for some other games that Canada was playing pre-tournament. And excuse me, it just opens up your frame of reference and what the world is like. And that's the one thing above being able to actually physically do the events. I feel fortunate to say that I've traveled really the world doing this job,
Hmm.
and knowing that and accepting that, and understanding that that those opportunities don't come along very often, again, makes me feel like I'm pretty lucky to do this job.
Hmm. And what do you think the impact of Canada making the World Cup will have on Canadian soccer going down the line?
I think it's the question we're still evaluating right now. We won't truly know the answer for 10 years, 10, 15 years, because imagine the kids who were up at 10 a.m., 5 minutes in, um, who watched Tajon Buchanan streak down the right side, put a perfect ball in for Alfonso Davies. And for the first time ever, Canada felt what every country in the world feels when their nation scores the World Cup. And it's this just unbelievable energy. And I was in the stadium when it happened. And even you know, I can describe to you now, sitting in the chair on the field, all of a sudden Davies scores. Now, I didn't cheer, but I got up out of my seat as if this like momentum took me. And imagine the young boys and girls who have watched the Canadian women win a gold medal just a little over a year before that. The young boys and girls who had been following this team, and seeing Alfonso Davies playing at Bayern Munich, and Tajon Buchanan playing in Europe, and now Kyle Larin doing so well in La Liga.
Hmm.
All of these players doing so well, and doing something that no Canadian, when you talk about the men or the women over the last, you think about Christine Sinclair and whatever, and everything that's happened since they did the U20 Women's World Cup in Edmonton 20 years ago to this point now, and you've seen all of these players, these young soccer players from across the country have embraced the sport, and it's incredibly cool. It's awesome. And now we have 2026 coming up in less than 3.5 years. And I've said this ad nauseum, people don't know what's coming. I mean, I live right by Exhibition Place, and the World Cup is
Hmm.
literally going to be across the street from where I live. And
Yeah.
it's now knowing that there's going to be potentially more games that Canada's going to have both at BMO Field and at BC Place in Vancouver. There's an energy that you can't describe when you're around people from all over the globe who've come to say, I'm watching a soccer game. And, I was very fortunate after Canada was eliminated to go watch two games. I watched Cameroon versus Brazil, and then I watched
Mhm.
the United States versus the Netherlands in the round of 16. And it's just to see that there's this thing on this planet, like culturally, billions of people we all point to as a form of expression, as a language that we all can understand. When you see it in real time, it's overwhelming, because you're just like, these are 90,000 people, not just watching like this isn't the Super Bowl, which is this kind of, yes, FIFA and the World Cup can be seen as this, contrived event, but it's so international, and it speaks to so many people from all over the world, that it transcends that sense of a financial transaction. Where you look at the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl really is this just huge,
Yeah.
it's this huge, I don't want to go on to say about capitalism, but I will say
Okay.
it
No,
is it is this huge money making venture that just happens to be centered around a football game. The World Cup is the way that we talk to each other through soccer, and knowing that there are young boys and girls in this country who are seeing Canadians excel in that stage over the course of time, over the next, as I said, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That's when you'll see the real impact of 2022. Well, the women win the Olympic gold, then the men qualify for 2022, whatever the women do in 2023 this summer, and then 2026.
And with the women, like there's 2 points, but the first one that I want to talk about, the Project 8, obviously, which people might not know, which is the new women's league coming in 2025. How do you think that will kind of impact the women's game in this country?
I know Diana Matheson personally. I count her as a friend, and I there is no more capable person to prepare Canada for for the ability to financially support, and then for the country to really embrace a women's league like Diana Matheson, someone who authored one of first. I think she really did put together one of the first great moments in Canadian soccer history,
Mhm.
scoring the goal against France in the 2012 Olympics to earn Canada a bronze medal, and then to see how closely she worked with the women's team and was a part of 2016, winning another bronze medal. But overall, just her investment, her intelligence, her dedication, her drive, her passion for sport, but particularly women's sport in this country. And to see that she's gotten CIBC on board and Canadian Tire on board, like this is not insignificant. It
Mhm.
really isn't. And I know, again, when we look at this country, this is still a hockey country, and it's always going to be. And in a regional sense, Leafs fans are Leafs fans, and Canadians fans are Canadians fans, and Oilers, Flames, so on and so on. But Diane Matheson is trying to do something that transcends all that. And we see, certainly the beginnings of that with the Canadian Premier League, because it's supposed to be a vehicle to, it's one of the prerequisites in order to get the Men's World Cup here. But this is different. Making a sustainable, successful women's league over time is a way of not just engaging another level of soccer, but it's bringing a whole segment, a whole market share, if you want to look at it from a business perspective. But really, you're looking at young women and saying there is a path for you, as what the PWHA is trying to do,
Mhm.
obviously, and then the Professional Women's Hockey League as well, like allowing young women. And then members of the LGBTQ2 plus IA community say, listen, you belong. You have a place that where you can showcase your talents, and that's important. Um, and I think Diana Matheson has taken the time, has given herself enough of a runway leading up to 2025 to say, really, when you think about the kickoff towards the World Cup, again, as a savvy businesswoman, Diana Matheson is saying, we're going to kick this off. You're going to get ready for the
Mhm.
2026 World Cup, watching some of the most exciting young female talent in the world playing in a Canadian women's soccer league. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and like it's awesome to hear, but there's also been a lot of feuding between, as you've covered with the men's and women's team with the Canadian Soccer Association. and Nick Bontis just resigned, and they have a new head of the organization. And Christine Sinclair talked about at the Heritage Committee about Nick Bontis, kind of saying not the nicest words to her. Do you think that could be something that kind of breaks that momentum of Project 8, but also the World Cup, or has it already?
It's a great question. Ultimately, this is going to come down to those, Charmaine Crooks is the new president of the CSA. It's going to come down to Earl Cochran, who sits in an executive role there. He used to work with Toronto FC. It's going to come down to the members of the Canada Soccer Business, who I think have finally understood that in order to get everyone on side with this very nebulous and you could use all kinds of other words to describe what people have thought about the Canada Soccer Business deal with the CSA, this 10-year plus 10-year deal. This is a moment where there are certainly those who would go ahead and say that the CSA and CSB have done a tremendous amount to help promote soccer in this country, and there are those who will say that the only reason they've been able to do that is because we are now in a golden age. We are firmly in the golden age of Canadian soccer. Those two sides have to sit down and understand that one needs the other in whatever iteration that looks like. But primarily, that when we're looking at specifically supporting athletes, when we're looking at continuing the success of the men's and the women's team, and I've said this publicly before, and I'll say it again, you're seeing it start to happen, that Canada Soccer Business and the CSA need to sit down and figure out this deal in the sense of making it appear less like a deal that benefits an unknowable group and more of a deal that looks like it continues to promote and benefit the present and future of Canadian soccer. Because if you listen to every member who has spoken out on the men's and women's side, they speak about this as kind of like, I don't understand, we're being successful, and yet us as players and the infrastructure of this association and the future is all contingent upon this entity that we don't know, we don't deal with in Canada Soccer
Mhm.
Business. So everyone involved with the CSA and CSB, and there are some very smart and intelligent people there. And I'm very pleased to know some of the athletes on the women's team, and I know obviously all of them on the men's team. We have, as I kind of listed out, and when you look at the men's, I'll give you the men's schedule in short order: CONCACAF Nations League this year, CONCACAF Nations League next year for the opportunity to get into the Copa America. On top of that, you have a Gold Cup this summer and a Gold Cup in 2025, and then you have the World Cup. If they don't feel like they have the proper resources, then the consequence that you run into is you're going to have players who over time do not feel an attachment to the CSA. And when you look at all the Canadian men, I'm only using the men because I know them, a little more intimately than I know the women. There are a lot of Canadian men now who are excelling in Europe: Alistair Johnston, Tajon Buchanan, Kyle Larin, Stefan Estacchio, obviously Alfonso Davies. Over time, that's going to increase. And if there isn't necessarily a strong relationship between the CSA and the men's team, then some of these players are going to go ahead and say, "Why am I playing for Canada when I can go ahead and earn a lot of money and get all the profile I need playing in the major leagues in Europe?" And
Cool. One. I wanted to mention that you mentioned how the women's team and the men's team, Canada's in right now this golden age, and the women's team play the World Cup this year. What expectations do you see for this team this year? What should be maybe their goal going into the World Cup? They just lost Janine Becky, which will be a major impact, but what should be their goal going in?
certainly, I mean, when you judge the men's team and the women's team, you can't judge them in the same breath, because one team is inside the top 10 and the other team is outside the top 50 or in and around the top 50. And the loss of Janine Becky certainly hurts the women's team. But remember, this is also a team that still has Christine Sinclair, but has Jordan Heidema, Adriana Leon, Jessie Fleming, Caitlin Sheridan. Like when you have some of the most recognizable players. Certainly, when you take a look at Jessie Fleming, what she's done with Chelsea, Adrienne Leon plays for Manchester United. It's it is really it is going to be a challenge for the women, and I don't mean challenge in the sense of they're like it's going to be a challenge for the women, certainly without Ginny and Becky. But this is a team that should be looking certainly to get out of the group stage, obviously, to possibly look to push into the semifinals. And Janine Becky said it before she got her knee injury. She said this team could win the World Cup, and that's I think that you still, if you're Bev Priestman, you still want to have that mentality. Now everything that's happened, certainly with the women, and now looking forward to the next camp, the potential that they could be in a legal strike position, certainly doesn't help the situation much in terms of preparation. But they're trying to, as they've said before, they're taking a stand toward not just benefiting them, but benefiting future generations of female players. Does that affect their preparation? Less time on the field means less time together, means less time installing some of the stuff that Bev Priestman wants to do. Yeah, it could hurt them. But knowing some elements of this team, having watched this women's team in various points over the last few years, this is an experienced team. People kind of forget that, this isn't. It's not just the gold medal. It's not just the Pan American. Like this is a team when you really dig down deep. Obviously, being so close to the United States and the successes they've had in the Women's World Cup and in the Olympics tends to skew the way we might look at the Canadian women's team. But this is a team that's won a continental championship, has won Pan American gold, has won 2 bronze medals, has won 3 Olympic medals. I mean, this is a very successful women's team. They're in the top 10, inside the top 10 for a reason. But it's when you get to Australia and New Zealand, I think the one thing too that's going to be interesting for them is the travel encompassed as well, going from Melbourne to Perth, which is basically going like from Toronto to Vancouver over the course of the tournament. It will be challenging. But this is a team in what could likely be Christine Sinclair's last Women's World Cup. This is a team that will be certainly driven, not just because of the successes they've had, but because I imagine too, what will motivate them is everything that's happening right now with the CSA.
Is there a player on the women's team that you think maybe will be able to break out, or you could see breaking out at the event?
I always look at Jessie Fleming as someone who has spent so much time being so successful at a very successful team in Chelsea. They get to the Women's Champions League, but can't also discount the fact that her Chelsea teammate Kadisha Buchanan as well. Like there's so much talent on this women's team, and selfishly, I want Adrienne Leon to get more playing time at Manchester United women's team as they push for their first women's title in England. So this team is going to succeed as a whole. This team that has so many great talents, they're going to succeed as a whole. But I think for so long people have wanted to see not more, but they've wanted to see all of Jordan Heidema's talents, and to know that defensively and in goalkeeping, Canada can consider itself among the top teams in the world. This is if and Bev Priestman, not to dismiss anything that John Herdman did, but you take a look at what Bev Priestman did in a situation like it was in Tokyo, a delayed Olympics, not in front of a lot of fans, the travel, the protocol, and the fact that Canada kept winning, and Canada kept, especially in high stress moments, kept succeeding. Whereas maybe in the past, penalty shootouts or important moments or games against the United States, where things wouldn't necessarily have broken their way, and the fact that they have a blueprint now for success in essentially there are 2 tournaments you win if you're in the women's team. It's you win the Olympics or you win the Women's World Cup. Those are the significant moments. Those are the significant tournaments for women's soccer at this point, at least. Not discounting England winning the Euros, but the major international tournaments. Canada has won one of them. It is not out of the realm of possibility that they could possibly, with that blueprint, win the other one.
And I wanted to go to the men's team. Obviously, they have an interesting schedule. They play later this week, I guess, against Honduras and Curacao. What do you make of the team that John Herdman's bringing into camp? Is it a good enough squad to win both games in that group?
Yeah, it is. It is a good enough squad. But the challenge that the Canadian men, first of all, many of them have played way too much soccer. Now, some of them got a month off after the World Cup. But when you look at, I'll take two players, for example, Alistair Johnston and Tajon Buchanan, who happen to be in their early 20s, who are so heavily relied on at their current clubs. Alistair Johnston has come into Celtic under Ange Postecoglou, and I was speaking to him a couple of or 2 weeks ago. He said to me, "Listen, I'm asked to do a lot of things on this team that like I'm having to get used to, and over the course of his career, and I'm only using Alistair. He went from his collegiate career where he was a central midfielder to a right back, a very defensive minded, aggressive right back. Now he's in a more offensive minded team, and all of this matters because he's played a tremendous amount of football over the last year and a half. Playing for Nashville, transferred to Montreal, helping Canada qualify for the World Cup, getting into the MLS Cup playoffs, then going over to Celtic immediately in an old firm derby. You can apply all of those same things to Tajon Buchanan. You can apply all of those things to Stefan Eustaquio, who has an injury history. So why am I bringing this up? It's only to say that as well as this team performed, and they performed well at the World Cup. They lost all three games, but they didn't lose apart from the scoreline against Croatia, which was essentially, after that 20 minutes in Canada, using all of the momentum and the adrenaline and energy
Mhm.
to make a statement in scoring their first goal. They were outdone by a far more experienced and technically savvy Croatian team. But when you think about Morocco and their run to the semifinals, well, the only team to really give Morocco fits leading up to the semifinals was the second half against Canada. You think about um, certainly Sam Adekubi was able to get the own goal, and then Atiba Hutchinson scoring. So there has been so much emotional and physical energy that this men's team has used in the last 18 months, 2 years to get to the World Cup play, and now some of them being more successful in Europe. And I spoke to John Herdman about this a few weeks ago. Squad rotation is going to be important. Making sure these guys get rest is going to be important because some of these players could be getting moves in the summertime. Tajon Buchanan has been rumored to be on a move. Jonathan David, who's now, you know, sometimes when I focus on Alistair Johnson, Tajon Buchanan, and Stefan Eustaquio, I forget that Jonathan David is, really pushing for the scoring title in Ligue 1 with a Lille team that is trying to get into the European places, who also is rumored to be on a move as well this summer. So all of these outside factors, all of these potential happenings for the men's team means that their focus isn't necessarily always going to be on, okay, what's the next international window that I have to
Mhm.
do and prepare myself for that. There's going to be outside things that they're going to have to get used to. And the outside thing that they're going to have to get used to right now that's going to affect John Herdman is club versus country. Jonathan David makes a move to whether England or Spain or even Germany, perhaps. How does he weigh that against playing for Canada at the Gold Cup? How does Tajon Buchanan, who had an injury
Mhm.
um, or early on the beginning of this season, after so much, how does he weigh that with a potential move to England or Italy? How does Alistair Johnston, after playing MLS football and then moving to Scotland, which is like MLS football but far more physical and intense, and playing on a Celtic team that could also get another domestic treble, how does he balance that with playing for Canada? So this is an important window because when you look at, as I was explaining, the timeline and the map that Canada has over the next 3 years, they have to stay in CONCACAF Nations League A, which means they have to be Curacao, and they have to stay above that line of being relegated, because if they're relegated, it might put them, irrespective of the new format of the CONCACAF Nations League next year, might put them in danger of not qualifying for Copa America. And the one
Mhm.
thing that's critical of all those things I've talked about is that they need high level competition to play against to get ready for 2026. Now with the rejigged format of 48 teams, and yet we're still going to have groups of four because FIFA was so
Yeah.
excited. And we were all so excited after the World Cup. It means that Canada could back its way into the round of 32 with finishing in third. But the fact is, you still want to play against high level talent. You still want to go ahead and get into the Copa America. And as John Herdman has said over and over again, We want these guys to win a trophy, like the women have already done over and over again. They
Hmm.
want the men's team wants to win a CONCACAF Nations League or a Gold Cup, or maybe even push to be super competitive in the Copa America. All of these things are true over the next 3 years, which means although John Herdman is in the best position because he knows these players, he's recruited them, he's also in a difficult position because a lot of these players now are saying, yes, I want to be successful for Canada. It's still true. Tajon Buchanan loves playing. He'll tell you
Hmm.
again and again how much he loves playing with his teammates for the Canadian men's national team. But the fact is, he also wants to have a successful club career, and he wants to earn enough money to support himself and his family, in a generational wealth kind of way. And so when those competing interests all of a sudden are trying to balance each other out, it could get difficult. But the one thing I will end off by saying is this: John Herdman is a master recruiter and a master motivator. Regardless of some of the criticism that maybe he, rightly or wrongly, but maybe perhaps constructive criticism he got for some tactical decisions he made during the World Cup. The fact is, he put this team together, and this team likes playing together. Um, but he might have to, as he said last week, dig down deeper to go ahead and find more talent to get ready for this very, very important run the Canadian men have.
You mentioned Jonathan David and Tajon Buchanan maybe having potential some transfers, and I know you've done reporting on those players. Where do you think those players might go? Do you have any information on those two players?
Yeah, it's everything you've heard about Tajon Buchanan is undoubtedly true. Like, there are clubs in the EPL who are very interested in Tajon Buchanan, and I can tell you, he had the chance to move to one EPL
Hmm.
team. He could have said yes, and he'd be playing in the Premier League right now.
Wow.
But the best thing for Tajon Buchanan has always been, I want to be very, very clear that I'm moving into a situation that I feel I can be successful in. There were reports Inter Milan was another one of those teams, and it's certainly a report that I can confirm. But the fact is, when you're looking at being a Canadian now in Europe, Tajon Buchanan is now considered a very cost-effective option for a lot of teams in Europe, because even though Canadians are showed to be very talented, there's a couple of things that have often worked against them. Passport being one of them. Alistair Johnston kind of got, didn't necessarily deal with that because he's a dual citizen, also a
Yeah.
British national, so he was able to go to Celtic a little easier. But with Tajon Buchanan and some other players of the men's team, Canada's ranking sometimes hurts them. But the one thing that works in Tajon Buchanan's favor, the one thing that works in Jonathan David's favor, one thing that works in all of these major men's players' favor is that they played in the World Cup, and now they're seen as super cost-effective options in an era where Chelsea is spending,
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars inside 4 weeks. You can now look at Tajon Buchanan as a cost-effective option where he provides, maybe there's parts of his talent that are a little raw that need to be adjusted for the top five leagues, and if he makes a move to Serie A or the EPL, though, that he has the work ethic and the desire and drive. As I said, I was talking to Tajon last week, and the one thing we were talking about is he has played every position on the field except for center back and goalkeeper over the last 12 months. And so
Yeah.
he is super versatile. With Jonathan David, it's a little different. I believe only Erling Haaland in terms of, and I don't know the exact stat, but when you take a look at cumulative goals over the last number of seasons, I mean, Erling Haaland is on a
Yeah.
different universe right now. But Jonathan David has certainly shown, especially with the crazy game that he had a couple of weeks ago against Lyon, where he scored a hat trick. He's found his confidence again, and when Jonathan David is confident, he's among the best strikers, best young strikers in Europe. And there was a potential for him to move last year, didn't necessarily work out, but now he looks at this. He looks at this window as potentially a time where he can move. But both, and this is, I think, the important point, going back to the point I made about Tajon, it's also very true about Jonathan, which is true about Alphonso Davies, which is true about every Canadian player. They're not jumping at any move. They're not just going to jump and say, hey, this European team in this league is batting their eyes at me, so I'm going to give it a shot. Not that I'm implying that Canadians in the past have done that, but when you're seen as a hot commodity, and the appreciation for Canadian soccer, men's soccer especially, has risen as it has over the last, when you really think about it, 12 weeks, 12 to 16 weeks, these men's players are now they feel like they have a little bit of leverage. So they're like, I don't know if this is the right move for me. So when I go back to the Tajon Buchanan situation, I don't know if moving to Club A is a good fit for me. Sure, it's in the EPL and maybe it's in a good position, but I want the best fit that's a fit for me. And the same applies for him and potentially Stefan Eustachio, potentially, even Alphonso Davies, who, yeah, you think about where he is now at Bayern Munich, and I don't say this with any inside information other than to say, if you're considered at your position the best in the world, wouldn't you want to go ahead and say, hey, listen, I'm still quite young. I'm not 25 yet. I'm not 24 yet. What's that next move look like for me? What's the thing? What's the move that's going to benefit me? And that's, I think, if you're a Canadian soccer fan, the thing that you should be heartened by is that Canadian soccer players, men's players, are now at a point where they're not necessarily calling their own shots because this is still soccer and
Yeah.
money rules all and the big clubs rule all. But you now could sit down at the table and say, what does this move mean for me? When Tajon Buchanan comes to when he comes close to July, the transfer window opens, he's sitting at the table going, okay, what position are you playing at? Because I see myself, my best position is X. Where you want to play me? You want to play me at Y? Well, maybe this isn't a right fit for me. And that's where
Mhm.
Canadian soccer players and the men's team has now risen to a level where they're not calling their own shots, but they can stand proudly and say, I'm of value to you, I'm worth something to you, then show me.
You mentioned Tajon Buchanan, Johnston. We haven't even talked about Kone. There's been all these guys in the MLS in the past, basically since the run, Canada's run to the World Cup, that have made that next step from the MLS to leagues in Europe. Who might be the next Canadian or Canadians in the MLS to maybe make big moves abroad?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So, um, when you look at the Canadians now, and Ismail Kone probably being the young Canadian that's certainly made a move. I mean, you can ask yourself, what does it look like for Kamal Miller? Although he's getting a little older, does he want to be a solid center back in MLS, or does he want to make a move? If Max Crepeau doesn't get injured in the MLS Cup, what is there potential for him to make a move to Europe? Dane St. Clair and the MLS All Star Game MVP. Is there a potential move for him? Is he someone who is going to go ahead and raise his profile enough? Um, the one thing, a lot of the young players now who are coming up, they're not only looking at the MLS, but some of them have already made moves to Europe, and they're in the youth academies, or they're the
Mhm.
U17, U18, U19 teams for some big teams in Europe, and some middle of the pack teams as well. Um, and in a lot of ways, we're trying to look at right now who the next Tajon Buchanan is, who the next Alistair Johnston is, because when you look at those players specifically, and Ismail Kone as well, we nobody knew who literally nobody knew who Tajon Buchanan was 3 years ago, or three and a
Mhm.
half years ago. Very few people who knew who Alistair Johnston was because he was playing in League One Ontario. So part of what we're doing right now is, there's a way to look at it. We're kind of scouting for who the next player is going to be in 3 years' time, and I think it's going to be key in two very, very particular positions. And John Herdman has brought in a few guys in this window, who are graduates of this CPL, who've now gone on to playing with some teams in Europe. But goalkeeper and central defender are huge for Canada. If you're looking at every other position on the field, Canada is pretty much covered. Certainly, Atiba Hutchinson, many would love him to play forever, but you look at himself and Steven Vittoria. Uh, Maybe you look at Milan Borjan as well, and say, okay, they're getting older. What's John Herdman's next step? Um,
Mhm.
what's his plan going to be for those guys? But especially at the center back position, because as well as Vittoria and as well as Kamal Miller played for large parts of the qualification campaign into the World Cup, Canada needs to be stronger and deeper there. And at goalkeeper as well, Canada needs to be stronger and deeper there as well. So if there's two positions on the field that I would say to Canadians, hey, listen, focus on these and see where the next guys are coming up, because it would be huge if these guys, if Canada can solidify itself with depth and talent, excuse me, at those two positions, then qualification is going to be a lot easier, because from the top, we look at Jonathan David and Kyle. Like Canada's best 11 right now would be Jonathan David and Kyle Larin, and behind them Stefan Estakio, and perhaps maybe you still look at Atiba Hutchinson if he wants to contribute, as he will in this window. And then on the right, you could have Tajon Buchanan. On the left, you could have certainly Richie Larea. Um, you look back behind you, certainly now Steve Vittoria and Kamal Miller, as I mentioned, but certainly on the left side, Alfonso Davies has played anywhere and everywhere. And on the right side, in a 4-4-2, you have Alistair Johnston. Canada has a very strong lineup. And
Hmm.
when you look at compared to the United States, Canadian players are starting in Europe at a greater rate than they are in the United States. And so, even though the states have far more talent, bigger population, more established system, right now the Canadian talent, the talent that Canada has at its best, is playing with some of the best in some of the best leagues in Europe. So, but center back and goalkeeper, those are the two parts of the field that over the next number of years, every fan should be keeping an eye on.
Lastly, before I let you go, I want to ask about John Herdman. Obviously, he's been just the architect of this team making the World Cup. I think most people would say they don't make the World Cup in 2022 without him. Now he was linked to the New Zealand job. He refuted it, kind of all in. How likely do you think it is that John Herdman is the manager in 2026 when Canada plays its first game on home soil?
Well, I asked him twice in Qatar. I asked him first on the field, and then I asked him in the tunnel afterwards, and he gave me the same answer. Um, and on the broadcast, my good friend and colleague Jenny Becky was like, "Okay, Scianitti, you asked him enough. Which is, are you going to be here? Are you going to be here?" Because, as I said before, the thing about John Herdman that is, when you speak to the women's players in particular, and I've spoken to Diana Matheson about this, and Janine Becky, there is an appreciation for the value that Herdman gives and makes his players feel like they have. And
Mhm.
that's really, really critical and crucial to a country that, prior to John Herdman coming here in 2010, 11, 12, Canada didn't have a sense of self confidence. The women didn't have it. They gained it, and it propelled them to their greatest, an incredible 10-year run you can't compare to. Um, the men now are in a position at a time in their history that they have never been. They are okay. They're inside. They're out in around 50th in the world, but that's not really a reflection of the kind of talent and team they have. It's more of a reflection of they haven't really played a lot of games against top opponents, and when they have done that, it hasn't necessarily gone their way. But the one thing that I can say about Herdman is he has given all of those players in the men's team a sense of, as that sense of leverage I just spoke about, that comes from John Herdman, because he's a
Mhm.
master motivator, as I said, and a recruiter, as I said. And his messaging has been so key to delivering these guys on the men's team from basically nowhere in, in the men's game to the World Cup. And it was so critical for them to get to 2022, to feel that sense of accomplishment, to go to BMO Field, to beat Jamaica, to have the country going crazy, going nuts, irrespective of all the stuff with the CSA,
Mhm.
but to feel like, holy crap, we did this. We made it all the way to the mountaintop. Because now, when you're looking at a new leadership team going into 2026, you're looking at, as already mentioned, the Stephen Stackers, the Alistair Johnsons, the Tajon Buchanans, the Ismail Kones. All of these guys, you're looking at them and you're saying they know what it's like to get to a World Cup. Ismail Kone knows what it's like beyond playing the championship. He knows what it's like to play at a World Cup,
Mhm.
and that's huge for a young player like that. But the challenge that Herdman's going to have now is is developing and revolutionizing and tinkering with, and all the words and adjectives you want to use in terms of his playing style. Canada played a super aggressive playing style in Qatar. They were on the front foot a lot, and it really benefited them, because the one lifelong regret that every Canadian, I can tell you, the many on the men's team have, and every Canadian fan will have, is that game against Belgium, because Canada should have had something from that game, irrespective of Alfonso Davies' penalty. They deserved, if not a win, at very least a draw
Yeah.
from that game. And how do you take that knowing that a savvy Belgian team who weren't very good were able to squeak out a result, and then you went to a against a Croatian team that weathered the storm for 20 minutes, went down, and then were able to work themselves into the game. And
Mhm.
then you go against a team against Morocco, where, quite frankly, the only reason Canada lost that game is because of two mistakes they made in the first half. And if not for those two mistakes, Canada looks at another result. And Atiba Hutchinson hitting that header late on, you're looking at least two games that Canada should have taken something from. And that comes down to not just motivation, not just rah, 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 not just this talk of brotherhood we've heard. It comes down to coaching at the critical moments, knowing, okay, we need a little tinkering here, a little tinkering there. And this is not a criticism of John Herdman, it's just a fact. The men learned a lot about that stage and what it requires in terms of physical, mental, emotional, psychological engagement. It's so intense in every respect. From the moment the first ball kicks off to the moment whether you get to the World Cup final or you're eliminated, it doesn't stop. I mean, I felt it. I was there.
Mhm.
But as a coach, it doesn't stop either. And if anything, there's so much more on you as a coach because you're expected to manage the emotions and the players and the training and all of this. And John Herdman, I'm sure will come back with a lot of takeaways. And as much as that's why him being a part of the men's team for 2026 is critical, not because of continuity, because I imagine John Herdman looks at this men's team, looks at the talent that he has, and said, we should have done more at this
Yeah.
World Cup. Maybe we don't come out of the group stage, but we should have tied a game or two, or maybe we should have won one and drawn the other game.
Yeah.
Knowing him, knowing how obsessed he is about details, doubtlessly he's gone through his head millions of times and said the couldas, the wouldas, the shouldas, and now looks at 2026 going, we're going to be on home soil. We're going to have the advantages of being a host nation at the World Cup. We can't take that for granted. He'll want to be better prepared. He will be better prepared, and he'll make sure his players are the same.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on and taking the time to come on this podcast. I just wanted to give you the floor. Is there anything you're working on, any pieces that people should kind of keep their eyes and ears open for at TSN?
Well, I will say two things. As a lifelong New York Jets fan, if Aaron Rodgers makes the move, I have put out we've already put a quick feature together about that.
Okay.
I can certainly tell you I'm not overly excited about it, but it's just a feature just reflecting on the fact that when Aaron Rodgers, if he does in fact suit up as the starting quarterback of the New York Jets, he will immediately become the greatest quarterback in New York Jets history. That's even compared to Joe Namath. So we did something fun and interesting with that. Uh, I would say get ready for the summer. We've got some things cooking. We're
Okay.
ready for if those big moves happen. We expect to be there, and we expect to be at the forefront, waiting and super eager to report on what Jonathan David's move will be, what Tajon Buchanan's move will be, what any Canadian
Mhm.
and their next move will be. So look forward to that. And the one thing I'm super excited about is last year was juggling a lot of stuff from MLS to Canadian men's national team to CFL. I'm very excited to feel like I can focus a lot on the CFL
Mhm.
this summer, because it's a league that if not for that, I don't go to the World Cup. If not for the CFL, I don't know if I have a career at TSN. So I'm looking forward
Mhm.
to getting back to some football.
Well, I'm really excited for the CFL and the moves. I hope Jonathan David goes to my Manchester United, and I hope my Red Blacks aren't the worst team in the CFL this year. So, thanks so much, Matthew, for taking the time and coming on.
I knew there was something I liked about you, Alex, as a
Yeah,
fellow United fan as well. So I
great,
appreciate you having me on.
great, great. Thank you.